me Whaitiri specifically.
There's a collapse on, though, in the Labour vote at present. The polls are pretty dire for Labour. They will wish they had a snap election back in April before the budget, but anyway. And those votes are now up for grabs. The Greens will get quite a lot of them. I would have thought in the Maori electorates, this has got to be one of those chances where they're aiming for 7. I think they'll get 5. And I'd look up north. Remember Tohenare won that in, was it 93? And the north tends to feel that it's not respected by the two big parties, and it does odd things from time to time, including voting for Winston Peters.
I'm not sure I would overstate the collapse on for Labour. The polls, most of the polls we've seen have been taken before the party launches. Last weekend, Labour had a good party launch where they established the idea that they're in this fight and they're serious about it, and they had their free dental policy, and that was very strong for them. National also had a strong launch in the sense that they looked like winners, and that was their aim there. But, you know, I don't think you can say that Labour are out of this by any means.
Labour will need to see, and potential Labour voters will need to see polls that have a 3 in the front of them. Yes. And at the moment, we're just seeing 2. You know, Labour's in the 20s at the moment. It's lost nearly half its support. You know, this has never happened before right. At this point. And once people think it can't win, then they either don't vote or they go looking for a small party, and it becomes self-fulfilling.
That's right, they run out.
If you're a left-wing person, why wouldn't you vote for the Greens? I mean, Labour won't even reform the tax system.
That argument is compelling.
There's similar issues going on the right, but for goodness sake, Labour's meant to tax the rich to give the money to the poor, and it refuses to, so...
Well,
crazy.
Lara, it does feel like a long time ago already since we saw Labour's dental policy and these big campaign launches. A week, they say, is a long time in politics, but it does seem that was a surprising moment in the campaign. I don't think anybody was expecting or predicted that policy, but it has, I suppose, heads have turned to other parties relatively quickly since then, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a quick-moving campaign. There's going to be, it seems like there's been lots of policy announcements. I mean, going back to the dental policy, I do think that this election, coming back to what you guys are saying, is like going to come down a lot to turnout as well. So it's like, do people feel motivated enough to show up to vote? I mean, there'll be a long advance voting period and a lot of promotion going on, but will people bother ultimately? And I think that that's something that the parties are going to be looking to, you know, strategise to see who they can and can't turn out. I mean, that's quite firm in the sort of political science literature, even in New Zealand. Yeah. And it kind of reflects on previous elections like 2005, where turnout was incredibly crucial to the Labour vote.
A very cynical electorate at the moment. You know, they had 9 years of John Key, brighter futures and nothing, and addressing the underclass, and for 9 years nothing happened. And then it's even been more ridiculous over the last 6 years. So you've got 15 years of people hearing promises from politicians which are platitudes on the face of it, but they haven't even been delivered to that extent.
I think a couple of other things are going to happen. I think you're quite right that people who wanted some kind of tax reform or structural reform on the left will be looking seriously at the Greens, perhaps Te Pāti Māori as well. But also, I think as we get closer to election day, a number of people in the middle are going to start thinking back over the last 3 years and realising that Labour did an awful lot to save this country from economic as well as health disaster. And although people have soured since, I think that they'll start remembering that again.
Well, people are going to tune in those last few weeks, I suppose. People start to tune in more and more. But I want to just quickly finish on a column that Liam Dan from the New Zealand Herald wrote earlier this week. He wrote an excellent column, I thought, about the major parties' a lack of a plan for wealth creation and productivity. You know, neither party is really speaking to business and what they're going to do. These are important areas for us in the long term. Is it a big gap, Matthew, for our major parties at this time in the election campaign?
It's the most pathetic offering from the two main parties I've ever seen or even imagined. I mean, we have inflation for the first time in 30 years. We have a balance of trade deficit that is worse than in Muldoon's time, the worst in New Zealand history. We have a fiscal deficit, whether it was justified or not because of COVID, is unprecedented. The pre-fu will come out in the week ahead. People will, we'll probably have to expect it's close to a decade of deficits. And the two main parties think the smart thing to do is to throw fuel on the inflation fire with tax cuts or working for families handouts. These are not serious people. And it's
Good line.
you know, if you well they're not. If you compare them to the people that the Ruth Richardson or Sue Bradford, take your pick, they were serious people.
Simon,
you know?
that is, we've got 40 seconds. That is retail politics, though, isn't it, that we've seen so far from the major parties? Do they need to address productivity and wealth creation in business?
They do need to address that. They also need to address the reality that we now know in this country is really big in relation to climate change, and you haven't mentioned that. This country next year and the year after will face enormous pressures on the way we live and on the economy, and neither major party has any serious way of approaching that, and that is a real problem.
Yeah, it is a real problem. Thank you. We have run out of time as always. It's gone by way too fast, but thank you so much for joining us, Simon Wilson, Lara Greaves and Matthew Hooton. Thank you.